All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. What is chus, Baruch Hashem? It's a different daf after Reb Tzadok. It's nice, Baruch Hashem. So good to be back to Rebbe. Hey, man, we'll say, so we are, Mirz Hashem. Great chus to be back in Masechus Zevachim. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan Haba Aleinu L'Tova, Steve and Terry Zinn. In loving memory of Steve's father, Albert Zinn Bonim Tzvi Ben Chaim Zichron Levrach, on the occasion of his 20th yard site. Our week of learning sponsors, Keely and Jillian Goldberger, as a schus for an easy and successful surgery for Aaron. Their son Aaron Yeshaya Ben Rivka Esther, Baruch Hashem. Just happy to report Aaron did have a very successful surgery. Baruch Hashem has a long recovery ahead of him, but Baruch Hashem Yirtz Hashem will have many, many years of refuah, hatzlacha, and simcha meh ve'esim shanim tovos. Our day of learning sponsors, Shmuel Silber in the schos of a refuah shlema for Aaron Yeshaya Ben Rivka Esther. Okay, that's Aaron Goldberger, beautiful. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Ayala and Sarah Steinberg, in the schos of a continued of health for Shulamis Susha and for a continued refuah shlema. Daf Yomi today sponsored by Tzipora Frager B'schus refuah shlema for Yaakov Ben Aaron Malka Esther. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families and Nechama, all those who need a refuah, should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael and Mirz Hashem should be zocha to continue B'soros Tovos for all of Klal Yisrael. But with that, let us go. We have a really interesting daf ahead of us today. We're going to close out what we call, I guess, our exegetical sugya, and then Mirz Hashem transition back into the literally again the kishkas. Quite literally, the kishkas of Karbanos. So with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Nun Al 51. We are picking up a Mirz Hashem on Nun Amud Beis 50b. Dover, right by the, and it has a period in my Gemara, but it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom of the daf of 50b, last word on the line. So Gemara asks a couple of more exegetical questions. Dover halame b'kav chomer, ma'ashem b'yinav. Ultimately, again, something that is learned up by Kav Chavosai. By the way, I just want to point out Reb Zevi Daniel, who is now Baruch Hashem joining us on Zoom. Eretz Yisrael Chevra, the guy still sitting in a sukkah, that's Zevi Daniel. He's in Eretz Yisrael, so make sure you get to know him. So Zevi messaged yesterday. He's like, I don't understand. In general, we'll say we believe that Kav Chomer's Gzeira Shavas, like you can't just make this stuff up. Right? You can't just make this up. In other words, these have to be part of the Masorah. We actually believe that the Torah Shabbal Peh. So what is the Gemara like spending all of this time asking, can you learn this, can you learn this? Either we have a Masorah for it or we don't have a Masorah for it. So it's important to understand that sometimes it can be that there is ambiguity or questions about what exactly the Masorah is. We have questions about that, or sometimes there are conflicting transmissions of things. So what the Gemara is trying to do is outline principles. Because, for example, let's say for argument's sake, somebody comes and says, I heard from my Rebbe that, and he espouses a limud, and that limud is based on a kal v'chomer that is then used as a source for a hekesh. All right, for argument's sake. If we know that principle, that you can't do that is not exegetically, that does not work, that's an indication that perhaps there is some type of flaw in that transmission. So in other words, we're not using necessarily these principles, we're not using these principles to invent new limudim, but we are using them ultimately, again, to be able to kind of measure things that come up in the base medrash. Does this statement fit within our established exegetical framework? If it does, okay, then we can analyze it. But in the event that for some reason it doesn't fit inside the established exegetical framework, that might be a good indication that someone got something mixed up or someone got something wrong along the transmission process. Good. So now Gemara asks another question. So what happens if halacha l'maisa? What happens if something is learned out, right? B is learned out from a kal v'chomer. B is learned out from a kal v'chomer from A. Mashlam binyanav. Could B then serve as a binyanav? Remember, we'll say binyanav is like our paradigm. Could it serve as a paradigm for C? Rabbi Yomi, Tashma, let's analyze this. Very interesting case here. Malak v'nimtzas treifa. So we'll say if you do malik on a bird, we're going to talk about this obviously in much greater depth. But malika, I will say again, remember for karbanos, we don't have shchita by a bird, we have malika. So what happens if you do malika on the bird? Coin holds the bird with the neck facing the Kohen takes his thumbnail, then goes ahead and drives it into the back of the neck of the bird, flicks off the head. So if it turns out that the Kohen did malika, and it turns out that the bird is a treifa, what is the halacha? What is the status? Rameir says, Rameir says it does not contaminate when you swallow it. Now, what is that talking about? Take a quick look at Rashi. Rashi's right across. Kidin nevelas of tahar. So the halacha is, in general, if you were to eat a bird that did not have proper slaughter, right? Or for that matter, again, a bird that was slaughtered properly but turned out to be a treifa. So remember again, that's an nevela. A nevela transmits tumah. There is a unique halacha by a bird that the way you contract tumah from a bird nevela is when you swallow it, when you eat it. If you were to eat it and then swallow it, the moment that it's beis habliya in your throat is the moment that it transmits tumah. Why that is, we're not getting into right now. That's based on a lima. That's based on a drasha in the Gemara. So what Rameir is suggesting is as follows: that halacha l'maisa, if a bird had proper malika, right, even though it turns out that the bird is a treifa, it can no longer be categorized as an avela. Why? Because by definition, an avela is an animal which died without proper shchita. Once you do shchita on an animal, even if you can't consume it, let's say because it's a treifa, shchita helps in that it removes it from the status of nevela. What's Rabbi Meir's chiddush? That malika has the same status as shchita. Malika shchita, and therefore again, even if in this case where the malika won't allow consumption of the bird because it's a treifa, malika will act as shchita, removing the nevela status from the animal, and because of that, the bird, will not transmit tumah if it is consumed by the Kohen. So just finish up that Rashi. He says, "Mitam beis habliya kedin nevelas of tahar." De'in malikas treifa, de'in malikas treifa, but kachim and taharis midev is actually the next opinion. Vuadinami lish shoch et ha'of chulin treifa mitam Rabbi Huda. So we'll say, so again, that's right, Meir. Rabbi Huda, back to the Gemara. Rabbi Huda, mitam beis habliya. Rabbi Huda says no. Rabbi Huda says it's not true. Malika is not shchita. Malika is not shchita. Or ultimately, again, even if malika is shchita, ultimately, again, he holds that halacha l'maisa, malika or shchita does not take away the din from the veil if it turns out that the animal is a treifa. Okay, so we'll say, so an interesting machlokes over here. Kohen does malika, turns out that the animal is a treifa, but he ends up eating it. Does he become tamei as a result of nevela? Rabbi Meir, absolutely not, because malika works like shchita, and shchita and malika won't necessarily allow the animal to be edible, but will remove nevela. Rabbi Huda, no, the animal remains in nevela, even though shchita or malika has been done. Rabbi Meir. So Meir says, kavachomer. I can prove this based on a kavachomer. What's the kavachomer? Uma nevelas behema shenitma b'mago b'masa shchita samitaharas. Meir says like this: when you take a regular nevela of an animal, right? A regular nevela. So what's the halacha? In a regular nevela, when you do go ahead and you do shchita on that, a regular nevela of an animal, which is a type of mago b'mas, which means what? I will say, if you go ahead, let's say you have an animal that just died. If you go ahead and you touch that animal, that's called a nevela. You touch that animal, right? That's mago, or you carry the animal, that's masa, you become tamei. Right? So already an animal has a chumrah over a bird because an animal is metame b'maga, contact, masa, carrying. A bird is only metame how? Bebeis habliya. When you saw, I will say, by the way, these are the kind of good facts. One of the most beautiful things about Daf Yomi is that on any general day, there is just some fantastically amazing information that you pick up. And the incredible part is just keep track of these little like nugget-lach of information. You build up a tremendous repository of Talmudic knowledge, which is really incredible, right? So nevela transmits tumah through maga and masa, yet nevelas ha'olf only transmits tumah through beis habliya. So therefore, again, Rameir says like this: when it comes to nevelas behema, which is mitam mago masa, yet if you do shchita on that animal before it died, obviously do shchita on the animal, that removes it from the vela and it no longer transmits tumah. Therefore, again, the Gemara says, Shemitai be'amago masa shchitas matar shefasa mitumas nevela. Of shemitai magamasa. Therefore, Amir says certainly again a bird which does not transmit tumah through maga and masa, rather only through beis habliya, only through swallowing it. Eino din shetehei shchitasa mitaharas. Treifasa mitumasa. It goes without saying, therefore, that again, shchita, or in this case again by bird, it's malika, should certainly remove its tuma status. Incredible. So the Gemara says, in Lishadei shchatza mitares, treifasa mitumasa. Mamatzino b'shchita, shemachshrasa b'achilasa. So the Gemara says, mitares mitreifasa mitumasa. I'm sorry, let me go back. So there, end of nun. Therefore, again, Rameir says, Mamatzinu b'shchita. So again, I will say, so remember, there's two steps over here. First, there's the kavachomer. What's the kavachomer? So Rameir says like this. So if an animal, listen to this kavachomer, it's a good one. If a behema, which if it dies without shchita, is an avela, and conveys tuma b'maga u'b'masa, and if you shecht it, it no longer conveys that tuma, then all the more so a bird, which convey tuma bebaga ubemasa. Rather, how does a bird convey tuma? How does a bird convey tuma? Only through beis abiyah, through swallowing it. Certainly, shchita should prevent it from transmitting any tuma. That's the kal v'chomer. Now again, Rabbi, remember again, the kal is the bird, the chomer is animal. Both are talking about shchita. Get ready for it. Now comes the mamatzinu. Now, Rabbi says like this. Mamatzinu b'shchita, shemachshirasa b'achila. So we'll say now, watch this. So now, obviously, up until now, our conversation is about shchita. So what does shchita do? Shchita has the ability, number one, to ready something for consumption. In a general sense, right? Shemachshirasa b'achila, top of the Nunal, 51a, mitaheres treifasa mitumasa. So that same shchita, which readies something for consumption, also removes the possibility of tumah. Af malika shemachsharasa b'achila titar treifasa mitumasa. So to again malika, which you're going to both say is essentially the same thing as shchita for a bird. So malika, which allows an animal to be consumed, ultimately again should also remove any type of tumah status. So we'll see. So what Rameir just did, he made a kavachomer between bird and nevela, and then based on that made a mematzinu. Ultimately again, he made almost like a common denominator, right? And in that common denominator, he says essentially, what is shchita? Shchita is a process through which something is readied for consumption, and therefore, by definition, also removes tumah. So tumalika is a process which allows consumption, and therefore should also remove tumah. So the Rabbi Yossi says, Daya kinevelas behema tahora. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi says like this. Rabbi Yossi says, in reality, it should be no more than a velas behema tahora. How so? Sheshchitasa mitaharasa velo milikasa. So Rabbi Yossi kind of shuts down the evolution of the comparison, of the common denominator. He says, at most, what you could get is that shchita of a bird should be like shchita of an animal. Right? I'll agree with you that just like shchita renders something fit for consumption, so too again, shchita could remove tumah. But you can't necessarily make the jump to malika. Right? Malika might just be a separate parsha. So dayik kenevelas beima Torah sheshchitasa mitahares velo milikasa. To which the Gemara says velohi hasam tehavihi mishchitas dechulin kaasyon. So to which the Gemara says that's not necessarily a good raya. Ultimately, again, why Abosai? Because at the end of the day, remember, shchita that you're talking about by behema, it's about shchitas chulin. So remember again, both sides, this whole discussion that we're involved in is all about using multi-level exegetical methodology where? By kachim. That's where this all is. So the truth is, the conversation you brought up beforehand is not really so relevant because you're not, at least when you're talking about shchita, you're talking about shchita of chulin, not shchita of kachim. Okay, so the Gemara kind of tables that. Next. Davar halamid bebinyanav, ma'u shilame behekish, or begzir shava, or bekavachor binyanav. So now the Gemara asks a more sweeping question. If something is learned out from a binyanav, right? So what's a binyanav? Binyanav is like a paradigm. So B is learned out from A through the mechanism of binyanav, a paradigm. Can you then use B ultimately again as a source for a hekish, a comparison, a gzir shava, a kavachomer, or another binyanav? Is that possible? To which the Gemara says, Pashat meha chada. So let's at least answer one of these questions. He says, Mipnei ma amrulan bidam kasher. So let's listen to this. Mipnei ma amru lan bidam kasher. So we'll say, there's a concept of lina. What's lina? So lina is any sacrificial, in this case sacrificial blood, that has been left over in the azara after shkia, after nightfall, right? Remember, sacrificial service is supposed to happen by day. The only things that happen by night is the burning of sacrificial parts and limbs. So let's say you have sacrificial blood, you left it over. It was just left in the Azara. So Rabbi say, Mipnei ma amru lan bidam kasher. Why do we say that ultimately, again, even if you left over blood, the blood's still kasher? Now Rabbi say, now what does that mean? What does that mean? If you look at Rashi, Rashi's actually pretty much right across. Mipnei ma amru lan bidam kasher, shim Allah lo yara. We'll say what this means is as follows. Imagine the following scenario. You left blood in the Azara, in the courtyard, past Shkia, past nightfall. Not allowed, you're not supposed to do that. So we'll say, so really, the blood is disqualified, right? Lina, leaving something, Lina literally means overnight. But if you leave something past this prescribed time, it's invalid. But let's say then you accidentally put the blood on the Mizbeach. He applied it. So Rashi says over here, how do I know that if that happened, Shem Allah lo yered? That ultimately, again, if it did go up, you don't take it down. Right? You leave it up. Simara says, Shahari kasher be'imurin imlanu imurin va'olam mizbeach liyard. So how do I know? Interesting. How do I know that even if blood, technically speaking, became disqualified through lina, that halacha l'maisa, if you put it on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. Simara says, Shahare Lan be'emur and ksherin. So because ultimately, again, we know that if you ended up doing this by sacrificial parts, if you left them overnight and did not put them on the mizbeach, ideally you should have put them on the mizbeach. But if you accidentally did put them on the mizbeach, halacha l'maisa, they remain kosher. So the Gemara says, "Lan be'imur and kosher." I'm sorry, shahari lan be'imur and kosher, lan be'imur and kosher, shahari lan be'basar kosher. And I will say, ultimately, again, how do I know that ultimately lina ba'imur is kosher? Because same thing with the sacrificial meat. If you went ahead and you left it over, you left it past the prescribed time, and then you put it on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. So we'll say, when we say kosher in all of these circumstances, talking about the same case, which is something became disqualified. You should not have put it on the mizbeach, but you did. Ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, you don't take it down. You leave. That's what it means when it says kosher. So we'll say, so what do you see happening over here? You see, interestingly enough, that things are being learned out from a binyan av or from a hekesh, and then being applied to other binyan avs and other hekeshim. So similarly, again, in Yotzei, what happens if something is taken out? So we'll say, by the way, there is a tremendous Moshe Haskell. Well, let's finish this up. He says, Yotzei. So we'll say, what happens if something now, Yotzei is the psul, if something sacrificial was taken outside of its permitted area. So same idea, Yotzei, how will be Yotzei kasher bebama. So I'll say, see, interestingly enough, halacha, let's say something was taken out and then brought back in and put on the mizbeach. So that's the halacha. You leave it there. You don't take it down. Why? Because technically speaking, there is a form of yotzei that is kosher. What's the form of yotzei that's kosher? By a bama, right? At a time where either communal or where private altars were in use. So halacha l'maisa, there's no din of just keeping the carbon in a particular area. Wherever the carbon goes, you're allowed to go ahead and offer it up. So since there's a concept of yotzei, that's kosher. Therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, if you put it on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. Tameh, it's a very interesting. What about tameh? So I'll say, so again, let's say halacha l'maisa, you have, Rashi points out over here, you have limbs of an ola which became tameh. Limbs of an ola which became tameh. Halacha l'maisa, you're not supposed to put it on the mizbeach. Let's say you did, you don't take it off. You leave it on. Why? Why? Because we'll say, since technically speaking, there is a way in which something that is tameh can be offered up. How does that happen? Tumah hotra b'tzibor. 51% of Klal Yisrael becomes tameh. Ultimately, we could offer up karbanos even in a state of ritual impurity. So so here what the Gemara is saying, since there's like a mechanism through which, or there's a reality in which something that is tameh can be offered up. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, if you put it on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. Next, chutz lizmano. So we'll say, so let's say again, a person has sacrificial parts that were offered up with a chutz lizmano, which we also call pigul intent. Ultimately, you shouldn't put it on the mizbeach, but if you put it there, you don't take it down. Because also remember, again, we saw this before, that halacha l'maisa, interestingly enough, the only time something really becomes pigul is if the matir is done, right? Remember, again, we saw this in pigul, you don't become pigul until the actual matir itself is offered up. So since the carbon itself doesn't become pigul until the sacrificial process is complete, therefore, halacha, if you ended up putting pigul items on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, Hoil umuratza lepigulo, hoil v'chashuva hartzaz damo lechayev ala mishum pigul, kimo shekara matir be'achshel, v'fichach emuri pigul shal lo yardu. Okay, so therefore, again, I will say all these cases are you accidentally put up these invalid sacrificial parts on the mizbeach. Don't take it down. Chutz limkomo. If you went ahead and you offered up a carbon and you did it with the intention to eat it out of its permitted area, so ideally you should not offer it up on the mizbeach. If you did so, you don't have to take it down. Because it's compared to pigul. Similarly, again, I will say, let's say you had a carbon and Kabbalah was done by an invalid Kohen. A Kohen is unfit for service. And he did Zrika. Ultimately, again, I will say, and then they put the sacrificial parts on. How do I know that I still leave them up there? Because it's about the kind of people who, technically speaking, they might be puzzled for this avoda, but they would be fit for a type of communal service. A good example of that would be Kohanim who are Tmeim, which may be unfit for service now, but in a case where the majority of the tzibor is Tamei, they would be fit for service. So the Gemara says, one second. But do we go ahead and do we learn out something that is in an unfit state from something that is in a fit state, like again, like this case of the Kohanim or Psulim, to which the Gemara says, Tana, Mizos Torah Sa'ola Riba Samichle. So we'll say, to which the Gemara says, yes, because there are additional phrases like Zos Torah Sa'ola, which comes to include all of these additional cases. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, at least to this last question, the Gemara says, if something's learned out from a binyan av, can that go on and then teach me something through a hekesh, exer shava, kalachomra, binyan av? The answer to that would seem to be yes, because that's an example of all of these things ultimately, again, that are learned out one from the other, which is quite interesting. So I'll say there is a tremendous Moser Haskell in this last piece also. What do you notice about it? What's the common denominator amongst all of these cases? The binyan av, right? In all of these cases, the binyan, or the tzara shava, the binyan av is, these are all circumstances which should not have been offered up on the mizbeach, but once they go on, we leave them there. Which I will say, I think often is just a tremendous yisod in our avodas Hashem as well. There are times in life where really we may be unfit to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Perhaps, again, at the end of the day, just decisions I've made, things I've done wrong have really, really compromised my standing. And the truth is, I'm not fit to go on the mizbeach. I will say, sometimes even if you're not fit to go on the mizbeach, what do you do? Get on there anyway. Get on there anyway. Don't worry about whether or not you're sacrificially fit. Don't whether or not you're spiritually fit. Don't worry about whether or not Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to accept me, not going to accept me. It doesn't matter. Sometimes in life you just have to do what you got to do and figure it out afterwards. You are in the right spot, not in the right spot. I'm roi, I'm not roi. Just get yourself on the mizbeach of sacrificial service. Just get yourself on the mizbeach of avodas Hashem. Because the beautiful part is, once something that is pasul is put on the mizbeach, what happens? We don't take it down. We spend so much time trying to figure out, are we good? Are we not good? Are we fit? Are we not fit? Does Kadosh Baruch Hu want me? Doesn't he want me? Does he love me? Doesn't love me? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Just do what you're supposed to do. Get yourself on the mizbeach of avodas Hashem, and once you're there, there's only one direction, and that's forward. Incredible. All right, let's go right there. So again, I want to point out, it definitely appears from the Gemara that we reject Rabbi Yochanan's statement. Remember again, Rabbi Yochanan? We had Rabbi Yochanan a couple of days ago. On Mem Tesam days, Rabbi Yochanan was the opinion that said that in general, B'chala Torah kula, l'meidin lamad milamed. We can learn out something that is extrapolated from something else. He says, except by kachim, right? So Rabbi Yochanan's whole model was by kachim. If B is learned out from A through some type of exegetical method, it cannot be used as a source for C. It would appear that the Gemara clearly rejects that, right? Because we just spent the last 2 days focusing on how to use the exegetical methods, or what is the extent of the use of exegetical methods to learn out dafka by kachim. So it would appear that the Gemara rejects that, although again, we're pausing over here in the sugya, but we're not yet finished. Okay, let's go back there. Says the Gemara, close to the Mishnah. Shir Hadam. Suppose remember again, this part of the Mishnah was talking about the chatos apnimi, inner chatos. Was an example of inner chatos. Parallel and Davar Menatzibur, Par Kohen Mashiach, Par of Yom Kippur, Sir of Yom Kippur. These are inner chatos. So both say, I remember again, even with the inner chatas, remember again, there's a lot of stuff that happens with the inner chatas. What happens? It depends on what type of carbon it is. But let's say by Yom Kippur, you'll have blood applications inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. You'll have blood applications outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim in the Kodesh towards the curtain. You'll have blood applications on the inner Mizbeach. And then when you finish everything, what do you do with the remnant blood? With Shiari Adam, you take it outside, and ultimately again pour it on the base of the Mizbeach. So the Gemara says, my time, what's the reason for this? Amakra, al yisod Mizbach ha'olah, asher pesach o amoy. So it's actually quite incredible, because the pasuk says, what do you do with the residual blood? You pour it out at the base of the Mizbeach ha'olah, that is at the entranceway of the Oel Moed. Okay, so we'll say, see here's what I want to point out to you. Right, so remember again, we only need the picture one time over here. You're coming out, right? You did the Mizbeach HaPanimi, you did the inner chatas. You're coming out, right? Now when you come out, the first thing you see is the Mizbeach. Now interestingly enough, the first thing that you see over here really is what we'll call like the southwestern side. Yeah, like southwestern side of the Mizbeach, right? You see this side and you see this side. These are the two closest sides. Now, interestingly enough, I mentioned this before, the Mizbeach does not have a yisod. It does not have a base around all of it. It actually only has a base, if you know, I don't know if you can see on this picture, on two sides. Yeah, on two I'm looking longingly. All right. Where's the laser pointer? Okay, fine. All right. Thank you, Rishon. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. So if you notice again, so when you go ahead and you come out, thank you. So when you come out, right? So again, for Chatas Pnimi, cover on Zoom. I don't know if I hope you can see this. I don't know. Oh, sorry. Good, better? Okay. Little positive encouragement wouldn't help, you know? Try, man. All right. So again, so remember, when you do the Chatas HaPnimi in here, so you come out. So the Gemara is noticing very interesting. If you look at the drasha, so the Gemara says, the drasha of the Gemara is, al yisod Mizbach ha'olah. What do you do with the shirayim? What do you do with the leftover blood? You see this So it's interesting. So the Torah says, Kohen, spill out the blood, remnant blood, by the base of the Mizbeach Pesach Oel Moed. Spill out the blood by the base of the Mizbeach, that is the entrance of the Oel Moed. Now, both say, there's only one Mizbeach HaOlah, right? There's only one Mizbeach, which animals, this Mizbeach over here, remember again that little Mizbeach over here, that's for Ketoras, that's for incense. There's no animal offerings on that. So it's interesting. So Mizbeach HaOlah, that's this. Why does the Torah have to say that this Mizbeach HaOlah is Pesach Oel Moed? That's obvious. When you walk out of the Oel Moed, the Beis HaMikdash, you're bumping right into the Mizbeach. But you're going right into the Mizbeach. So to teach you that where does the pouring of the remnant blood have to be? By the entranceway of the Oel Moed. It has to be on the Mizbeach HaOlah that you encounter at the entrance of the Oel Moed, which is right here. On this side over here. So this what we'll call, I guess, like this western side. This western side of the Mizbeach, ultimately, again, that's where you're going to pour the remnant blood. Now, the truth is, technically speaking, even if you poured it on this northern side over here, it would also work. But this Lamaisa, Asher Pesach, so pour it on Mizbeach HaOlah, Asher Pesach Oel Moed. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right there. So the Gemara says, Hahu de Pagav Avaresha. So ultimately, again, you do it on the side, ultimately, of the Mizbeach that you encounter first upon exiting the Oel Moed. Tan Rabbanan, Al Yisod Mizbeach HaOlah, V'lo Yisod Mizbeach HaPanimi. So first of all, the Gemara makes another drasha. Why does it say you pour out the blood by the base of the Mizbeach of the Olah? To teach you that you do it at the base of the Mizbeach HaOlah, and not at the base of the Mizbeach HaPanimi. Not the base, ultimately, again, of the interior altar, which was for Ketoras. El Yisod Mizbeach HaOlah, Ein Lo Yisod L'Pnimi Atzmo. Furthermore, again, the Gemara also teaches us that Halacha L'Maisa, there is only a base for the external Mizbeach. There is no base for the internal Ketoras incense Mizbeach. Al Mizbeach, supposed to just a lot of drashas from the same pasuk. El Yisod Mizbeach HaOlah, to the yisod of the Mizbach HaOlah, Tein Yisod L'Mizbeach Shal Olah. Okay, so both say this is another important teaching. All of this is being extrapolated from the same pasuk. So what does it mean? You should pour out the remnant blood, right, at the base of the Mizbach HaOlah. So listen to this phrase, Tein Yisod L'Mizbeach Shal Olah, which means any carbon that is brought on this Mizbeach HaOlah, as the same halacha, take the shirayim, take the residual blood, and pour it out at the base, at the yisod, one of these two sides. So anything that is brought on the Mizbach HaOlah has this din of shirayim. Oh, eina ella, mizbecha shal olah yeheli yisod, or maybe he's coming to teach me, ultimately again, look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, this is Rashi about 6 lines up from the bottom. O eina elam mizbecha sha'olah she'ei yisod. O eino ba lilmod klum al shvichas shirayim sha'olah v'shal shar damim. Ela ba lelamed kol halachos hamizbeach b'matan dama sha'olah shitein shtei matnoseha kineged hayisod. Well, so maybe he's going to teach you something different. Maybe he's going to teach me that. Remember, again, there were blood applications. We're going to talk about this. I don't know if you could see it, but if you see on this image over here, there are these 4 little boxes, these 4 little squares. Those are supposed to represent the chronos, what we call the corners or the horns, which protruded on the top of the mizbeach. I might have thought that maybe when the Kohen does blood applications, he can only do blood applications on the horns that are opposite a side, ultimately again where there's a base. So maybe again, blood applications only happen on corners that is on one of the sides where there is a yisod base of the mizbeach. So Rabbi Shmuel says kavachomer. He says, what's the Kavachomer? Mashirayim Shem Mechaprin Tu'unin Yisod. So Shem will say, which means pouring out of the residual blood, ultimately again, which don't affect kapara, right? You're going to both say, what happens on a sacrificial level? What happens if you don't pour out the residual blood at all? What's the halacha? Your carbon is totally fine. So by the Shirayim which don't affect kapara, yet they have to be part of the base. Chilas Ola Shem Mechaperes in Odin Shetuni Yisod. Then perhaps again the actual blood applications themselves, which halacha l'maisa do affect kapara, maybe those require yisod. Now again, I want to point out, when the Gemara says that the blood applications should require yisod, should require the base, so remember again, the Gemara is not suggesting that you actually pour out the initial blood applications or on the base. What it means is on the corners opposite the base. Maybe that's where you should do the blood applications. To which the Gemara Rabbi Akiva, Mashirayim shein mechaprin vein boin lekapara tu'uni yisod tchilas ola shemechaperes ba lekapara in addition to yisod. Rabbi Akiva furthers this. He says, furthermore, shirayim, right? So shirayim itself, right, the pouring out of residual blood, which does not affect atonement, doesn't come for purposes of atonement, yet halacha lemaisa must be poured out on the base. So therefore, again, tchilas ola, which means the initial blood applications that are mechaper and ultimately come for kapara, perhaps they should require application on the horns only opposite the side of a base. Imkain, mat hamalomar el yisod mizbach ha'olah. So ultimately, again, if that's the case, then why does the pasuk say to the base of the mizbach ha'olah, tein yisod lemizbecha shel olah? It's coming to teach me ultimately that what? That halacha l'maisa, any carbon ultimately that is brought on the exterior mizbeach has a din of shirayim, which means this is very important. Yisod mizbach ha'olah means anything brought on the mizbach ha'olah has a similar halacha, which is residual blood poured out along the base of the mizbach. Incredible. Amar mar al yisod mizbach v'lo yisod mizbach hapnimi. So again, I'll say another drasha. And again, we're just going through the braysos. Well, so just to point out what happened over here, there's a lot of things that really happened. Remember, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa. The Mishnah was speaking about specifically chatas pnimi, inner chatas, and the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa. If you go ahead and you offer up chatas pnimi, you take the residual blood, right, the leftover blood, and you go ahead and you pour it out by the base of the mizbeach. How do I know that? Because the pasuk says, Al yisod mizbach ha'olah sher pesach oel moed. You go ahead and you pour it out opposite the mizbeach that you hit when you come out of the oel moed. So that teaches me again that I pour out shirayim on a side that I encounter when I come out of the oel moed. Incredible. That's here. The Gemara now took that pasuk and just used it to learn out a number of additional halachas as well. Now the braysa is going. Thank you. The braysa is going to go through those halachas one by one. So let's go. Says Gemara, Amar mar al yisod mizbach ha'olah v'lo yisod mizbeach ha'panimi. So now one of the halachas that it taught me is it is only the outer mizbeach Remember again, this mizbeach over here that has a base, right? But not this mizbeach, not the inner mizbeach. So the Gemara says, what do I see from here? The Gemara says, Hami by leilugufei. 1 second. How can you use that pasuk for a drasha? I need that pasuk ultimately again to teach me the ikar halacha. Me'asher Pesach Oel Moed Nafka. No, I learned that from Asher Pesach Oel Moed. That teaches me that again, the blood application is done on the side, ultimately again, that you encounter when you come out of the Oel Moed. Incredible. El Yisod Mizbach HaOlah. So next to the pasuk said, right, what else do I learn from the El Yisod Mizbach HaOlah? Amud Beis Rabbi say, so cute. Right, so sweet. I was like, good. This is one of those dapim where if I couldn't finish the dap, I need to quit my job, right? This is like, good. We got this. So the Gemara says, so what next drasha? Al Yisod Mizbach HaOlah. Ultimately, again, from the Yisod of the Mizbach HaOlah, what do I learn from this? Tein Yisod LeMizbech Shal Olah. So we'll say, what does this teach me? This teaches you that halacha l'maisa, again, quite literally, give a base to the Mizbech of the Olah, which is another way of saying, any carbon offered up on the exterior altar has a din of pouring out the shirayim on the base. That's what it means. So the Gemara says, because ultimately again, if you thought that halacha l'maisa, that it's just as the pasuk is written, which means that the shirayim of the chatas of the nasi, because that's the context, should be poured out on the yisod. The Gemara says, Hani lama likra. Ultimately, again, then why would the pasuk be necessary? L'shirayim. Shirayim ha beroi avid. So the shirayim ultimately again are done on the outside. V'chitema. In other words, if it's just pashup pshat, then why is the pasuk necessary? If it's about shirayim, everyone knows that shirayim is poured out on the outer mizbeach. So this is very interesting. V'chitema. I might have thought. Listen to this. The apik mefach. Shabbos said, this is very interesting. Let me tell you this outside, then we'll look at it inside. So remember again, Shabbos say, even in our limited exposure to karbanos, so remember again, there's two different types of karbanos, right? There's what we call panemius karbanos. Karbanos done primarily on the inside. Now, if you're done on the inside, remember again, your primary blood applications are done where? Are done on the inner mizbeach, versus karbanos done on the outside, in which case, again, your primary blood applications are done on this mizbeach. So the Gemara says something very interesting. I might have thought that maybe there's like a little bit of a reversal going on, meaning what? Maybe the halacha is like this, that if your primary service occurs inside, then pouring out of shirayim occurs outside. And if primary service occurs outside, then pouring out of shirayim occurs inside. That's the havamina. The Gemara says, top of nun base 52a, I would have thought, Debroi legavai, udegavai lebroi. So ultimately, again, stuff that is done on the outside should go inside. Stuff and items done on the inside should go outside. In other words, if your primary avoda is done inside, that's when you part the shirayim outside. And if your primary avoda is done outside, that's when you part the shirayim inside. That's what I have thought. So the Gemara says, but 1 second, how could that be? Ha'ein lo yisod l'pnimi atzma. So here's one problem. The inner mizbeach has no yisod. Right? Again, we're going to get more into this, but remember, again, it's not just the pshat that it has a ledge, a base, but there was a drainage system over here also. That does not exist by this mizbeach hapnimi. So how would you have a havamina that you're pouring out shirayim by the inner mizbeach? That doesn't make any sense. To which the Gemara says, "O eino ella mizbeach sha'ola yeheli yisod." Or maybe again, as we just said before, that Allah said, no, what's the limud? The limud is anything offered up on that exterior mizbeach, ultimately again, has a din ultimately again of shrine, but maybe something different. Maybe halacha l'maisa, what it's saying is whenever you do blood applications have to be done on a corner, ultimately again, that is opposite the base. Maybe that's what's happening over here. To which the Gemara says, miksiv al yisod ha'olah. Does the pasuk say, do it by the base of the olah, which would seem to indicate that the blood applications themselves have to be done on corners that are opposite the base? The Gemara says, al-yisod mizbach ha'olah ksiv. It says, al-mizbach yisod ha'olah. Al-yisod mizbach ha'olah. I-hava ksiv al-yisod ha'olah, because if the pasuk would have just said al-yisod ha'olah, hava amina bizikifa shal yisod. This is very interesting about side. The reason the Gemara says it like this, if it would have said yisod ha'olah, I would have thought that actually blood applications would go like on the face, right? On the vertical, on the face of the ledge. ultimately, again, now that it says, it's actually interesting that you shall place it at the base of Mizbach HaOlah. It compares the base, ultimately, again, to the Mizbeach. How so? So the Gemara says, Agago di Yisod. Ultimately, again, just like halacha l'maisa. Just like halacha l'maisa, when you do blood applications on the mizbeach, it's done like on the top, on the gag of the mizbeach. So too, again, when you go and you do blood applications on the yisod, ultimately, again, it's done on the top of the yisod, the top of the base, the horizontal part, not the vertical part. Rabbi Shmuel, gag yisod lama likra. Still, why do I need a pasuk to teach me that you put the blood applications on the top part, right, or on the roof, so to speak, on the horizontal part of the yisod? Kavachomer, it's kavachomer. Umashi arechatos she'ina mechaperes tuna gag. So ultimately, again, the shrine of chatos, which ultimately do not provide kapara. Yet halacha l'mais, you place them on the top of the yisod. So ultimately, again, tchilas ola shemechaperes enodin shetuuna gag yisod. All the more so, ultimately, again, so the tchilas ola, the zika of the ola, which is mechaper, certainly, again, it should require the gag of these. So we're going to stop over here for today. We'll pick up. So remember, again, I'll say all the Gemara is doing over here, and we'll pick up more with this tomorrow. Is the Gemara quoted the pasuk? The pasuk was necessary to teach us that halacha l'maisa, blood application is done on the side of the mizbeach that you encounter right when you leave the Oel Moed. And now what we're doing is we're taking that same pasuk, making multiple drushas from it. And Mirat Hashem to be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, Chav Ranzum, have a great day, everyone. Yeah, sure. This, yeah, this doesn't give you. We're friends.
Hi, y'all. Hello.